Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. Since January 2011, I have conducted 2,000 radio interviews with artists who cross over all musical genres. I get to explore the regionalism of music in this country before full interconnection. What that means is that cats were able to come together in an organic fashion, get discovered, and wind up becoming units on the bandstand for many, many years. What happened then is that the vocabulary of music was expanded and extended. One of the things that's been refreshing on this journey after doing over 4,000 primary source interviews with the cats is that initially you believed the musicians are always searching for that state of bliss, when in actuality they are doing it to fucking live. In the 21st century, the so-called digital age, the roles of the producer and a musician have devolved into a potpourri of inanimate objects. The number of records you sell, how to make a hit, the drum machine, and a shrinking, more rigid music industry. Yet in the past, enclaves of regional music crossed the Great Divide from Houston to Arkansas to Toronto. Leadership was defined as getting out of the way and letting the wolf howl or letting the music play the band. And today I get a chance to speak to somebody who's been on both sides as a producer and as a musician and has continued to stay the course, even though he knows that maybe the significance of music is not as strong as it once was in our culture. Steve Tyrell, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, thanks, Jake. What a nice introduction of what you were doing, you know.
Well,
very fascinating.
Well, thank you, man.
Thank you for doing it, too, man. Thank you for keeping music alive. I hope it's not shrinking.
Well, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I just wonder about, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice, and I don't expect you to know who this is, but pay attention to the content, because I'd like you to come back and talk about it in your own opinion, okay?
Okay, sure.
Well, Houston it's where the shuffle came from. The dotted no tied to the 16th. Really? The shuffle beat, da 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 da. That's from Texas.
That came from Houston? I didn't know that.
So when you play the shuffle...
Just listen to the whole comment, and then we'll go through it.
This is what I grew up playing. You know, with that tenor sound, the Houston, Texas created a great tenor sound. That's what they would always say about the Texas tenors. So we came out of marching bands, right?
Right.
That's why the Crusaders had that open sound. So the thing that we learned about playing in a marching band is that you had to learn how to project your sound. And we're not talking volume, we're talking projection, which is a difference. Clarity, right? So in Texas, everybody had a strong sound. So they could play slower notes. You see, if you don't have long tones, that's what the kids don't practice today, the horn players. They don't work with those long tones. If you don't have long tones, then you have to play a lot of notes. But that's why when you listen to the Crusaders, they'll say, ba-dee-da-da-da-da-da-dee-da, ba-dee-da-da-da-da-da-da. That sounds more like an anthem. Those are long sounds, man. So...
All right, Mr. Tyrell. That was an amazing drummer.
Wilson.
That was.
Oh, that's not.
Yeah, that was a drummer I interviewed called Michael Carvin, a great jazz drummer. And but I wanted you to just talk about. I mean, I know you were born in Texas, but a lot of he said that Houston is where the shuffle beat started, and yet you talk to other cats from Texas, and they say nobody really owns the shuffle. So I wanted Steve Tyrell to talk about the shuffle beat, how prevalent it was in your early experiences, playing upholstered sewers and bars, and does anybody really own the shuffle?
I don't think so. I never knew that it was even credited from Texas. I mean, I grew up with Bobby Blue Bland and Jimmy Reed. And a lot of the blues and even guys like Johnny Ace from Houston were, but I was totally influenced by rhythm and blues music and so I never thought about, where they play a shuffle a lot, That would you call Bill Doggett shuffle? Would you?
I mean, well, I'm asking you. I'm not even a musician, man. I'm curious about like.
Well, I mean, to me, he started that. The first time I ever heard go don 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 don. Do 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 do. That was Honky Tonk, and the guy that it was Bill Doggett's record. It was a huge hit, but the guy who really made that lick was a guy named Billy Butler, and he was the guitar player.
Yeah, I know that cat. He played on a lot. He played on a lot of soul jazz albums on and Prestige and stuff.
Well, I always thought he should be the guy that gets a royalty on every. You know how many times and how many configurations it's been used.
Billy Butler. I love Tyrell, dude. You just, dude, give him all the credit. And because I wondered, why is that cat, back in the day, he was on every soul jazz album, and I was like, where did this cat come from? Now it makes sense.
He invented, to my knowledge, he invented that lick, because that's the prominent lick in Honky Tonk, the song Honky Tonk. And that's the song, basically. And I don't know. I always thought, man, we owe a big debt of gratitude to that cat. Whoever came up, if he came up with that lick, because it's been used in so many versions of rock and roll and rhythm and blues, probably more than anything I could think of.
Did you, like cats in Chicago, like. Butterfield and those cats. They had a like. He grew up in a very mixed neighborhood, but like Michael Bloomfield, Barry Goldberg, those guys had to find. They had to go and find the black.
Well.
Yeah, they had to go find the black music in Chicago. They had to go to the South Side. Did you have to seek out the black music when you were just a young kid?
I was born and raised in behind the grocery store in the 5th Ward, 1 block from where Joe Sample lived.
Oh, dude, I knew it. The Crusade. Go ahead. Please, go ahead.
I was the only white boy for miles. The only white people I knew were, my cousins. Everybody else was African Americans, and my buddies. And they went to school across the street from our grocery store at a school called Bruce School. But I couldn't go to Bruce School. I would have made the national news if I tried to go with my friends, So, and the whole neighborhood, sang out with Louis Jordan and my favorites when I was growing up was Bobby Blue Bland. He was just killer, man, and Jimmy Reed too.
Well, let me ask you, Steve. Let me ask you a question because the cat that I just played that audio from, Michael Carvin, his uncle was Don Roby. And Roby...
Yeah, I know Don Roby. I knew Don Roby well.
Okay, Don Roby, Sample told me, I did 2 interviews with Sample. He said that Roby would not let Chicago blues into the wards. I'm curious. I'm curious about, well, what is your exposure to Don Roby? Because, like...
I loved him, man. He liked me, and I liked him when I was just a little kid. I went to his office. He owned Duke and Records and a Peacock,
right?
And he was a hunter. He was a light skinned cat, Don Roby. He didn't necessarily look like an African American. He was lighter skinned, and he was a hunter. And he had he had all these heads in his office, and he was tied. He was tied to. A lot of people thought you didn't want to mess with Don. And that's probably true. But I thought none of these guys in his office hanging on the wall messed with him either. It was like he had all kinds of moose heads and bears standing up and all kinds of stuff. But he was a great music man, and I'm sure he didn't want Chicago blues coming in. He had his own Duke Records had their own thing, and so did the Fifth Ward.
Can you talk about the music? I cannot believe you grew up in the wards. I mean, Wilton Felder, Stix Hooper, Wayne Henderson. I've interviewed them all. I can't believe.
Yeah, well, you ask Stix. He's the only one left. I mean,
did you? Yeah, you're right. He's the only. Rest in peace. I mean, did you know? So, was the segregation to the point when not just you couldn't go to their high school, but could you play gigs with them?
I'm talking. Bruce was a grade school. I couldn't go to that, and then there was the high school was called Phyllis Wheatley. And when you talk to the Houston guys, they'll know Phyllis Wheatley, and that was the high school, and it was down the street. And all my friends were black, man.
Wow, this is great. No, this is unbelievable.
I didn't think anything of it. We didn't think anything of it. Joe Sample, the Crusaders were older than me, so we didn't become as good of friends as we ended up when I was a little kid. I mean, when I was 12, Joe was, I don't know, like 17 maybe or something. He's 4 or 5 years older than me. But as we got out of the hood, and I lived and I moved to California eventually, and I was always a Crusaders fan, man. I think their music is just,
it's the best, man.
It's the best, and it's different too. It's its own thing. Yeah. It's not a knockoff of anything. Joe wrote some incredible melodies. Wilton was a great bass player and a wonderful saxophonist. Stix is still cooking out here. Stix has a radio show he's just starting. I'm on a radio station in Los Angeles called K-Jazz 88.1. It's supposedly America's #1 jazz station.
Supposedly, yeah.
And Stix just got a show on that station too.
Isn't it? I mean, I have to. Well, first of all, we don't want to go. Stix for some reason will not. I don't know why he won't talk to me. But the reality is that the Gulf Coast sound. How would you describe the regional? I mean, I think that was the point of why I wanted to play the shuffle beat, the audio, because there was a Chicago shuffle, there was a shuffle in Detroit, there was a shuffle there were shuffles everywhere. But how would you describe the Gulf Coast sound that you were marinating in as a little kid?
Well, I came up in a different way, I mean, my family are Italian, so somehow I was, my influences were infused with rhythm and blues music, like Louis Jordan was a big thing. I named my first dog Baba Reba when I was 3 years old.
Yes.
My first dog, and I'm looking at my dog now. His name is Yogi. He's sitting here trying to get my sandwich.
Good.
Yeah. So I had Italian, European influences in my house, as well as rhythm and blues. So I wanted to be a drummer, but I wasn't a drummer. I even took lessons from a great teacher in Houston, but I just always could sing a little bit, and I kind of regret that. I wish I would have spent more time, actually learning to play, but it just didn't work out. I was always the singer in the band.
So fascinating. I mean, I guess ultimately, the Crusaders, those cats left for L.A., but I really wanted to ask you about the story. It doesn't seem to be chronicled anywhere. Is how you wound up getting connected to Scepter Records.
Well, I loved rhythm and blues music, and let me think about how that happened. I was working for a record distributor in Houston. I loved I got into the music business when I was in high school. I was becoming a promotion man for a distributor called United Record Distributors, and they had all the rhythm and blues labels. They had Atlantic, Chess, Motown, Scepter, and when I moved to New York, and they would try to spiff the guys that worked at their distributors. In other words, if he did something good for them, like like got one of their records on one of the top stations in Houston, which was my job as a promotion man. You know, they'd send you $200 or something, you know.
Sure.
And I said, because they were trying to, you know, all the labels wanted to, everything was independent, you know. So they tried to influence their distributors to do work for them. So I got a record of Scepter's, was a line we distributed on the radio station. I think it was "Foolish Little Girl" by the Tyrells, and Florence Greenberg, the lady who owned the label, said, and then she had a guy named Joe Medlin, who was an African American guy who worked the promotion, and he and I got to be good friends. And so she said, "Well, how can I repay you for doing that?" And I said, "Well, I want to go to the World Series. I want to come to New York. I've never been to New York.
I love this.
And I'm a Yankee fan, and I want to come to New York." And she got me tickets to the World Series to see the New York Yankees, which is my favorite team, still is, you know.
What year was that?
And that was in 1964. They lost.
You were 20 years old at that point. That is so freaking classic.
Well, it's true, you know.
What is I mean, just in today's world, because we live in such an anonymous time in the sense of when you talk about promotion, were you picking up records and dropping them off at radio stations? Can you talk about
absolutely. And we handled all those lines. We had several labels that we represented. And, of course, all the labels would talk to the promotion men and each distributor and try to get them to, you know, do something for them more than one of their other labels. So they all tried to befriend the promotion guy, you know.
Sure.
The labels did. And so that's how it really started. And I got that record on. I went to New York. I got tickets to the World Series, and I met Florence. And I could have just as easily, maybe, gone to work for Atlantic, because we had them too. And Jerry Wexler was kind of my idol. You know, he was a guy that kind of did, you know, A&R and promotion.
Absolutely. Oh, totally. You know? Yeah.
And Jerry and I were very tight. And he liked me a lot. But then, when I went to work for Scepter, he never spoke to me again. He held a grudge. But I thought to myself, well, you didn't offer me a job, man. What are you pissed off about, you know? You didn't offer me a job. I was 20 years old. I got a chance to work and move to New York, and I took it. But Jerry didn't appreciate that. I don't know what his problem was.
Well, he probably wanted you on the squad, you know, and you.
Well, why didn't he say something about it?
Well, you know? Come on. I mean, this is
my favorite label was definitely Atlantic.
It was hip.
They had Otis. They distributed the Stax and Volt. You know, they had Otis. I mean, I loved Atlantic. They had the Drifters. Those Lieber and Stoller tunes, you know.
So, I mean, do you remember? I mean, can you talk? I think one of the things that's so magical about that time, and I'm talking from an instrumentalist's point of view. I mean, you talked about wanting to be a drummer, but if you listen to just certain records from that time, it could be Al Jackson, could be Mickey Roker, Pete LaRocca, Max Roach, whatever, you know immediately who the drummer is. And when I look at the roster on Scepter, I mean, Chuck Jackson, nobody sounds like Chuck Jackson. I mean, That's
right. He was one of my heroes, and he and I went on the road together, man.
What?
We were like brothers. Yeah, we went on the road together.
Wait a minute.
And, you know, because Chuck would play places like the 20 Grand in Detroit.
Sure.
And he would play.
The 20 grand. Tyrell was marinating. Wait, dude, you're a soul brother, man.
Yeah, that's right. And I would go with him on the road. It would just be me and Chuck. You know, I'd represent. You know, because he was on the label, and we'd go there. We went to, oh man, there was a 20 grand, and there was a place in Philly, and it's escaping me now. There was the Uptown
Sure.
Theater in Philly.
Right.
And Apollo, I went to the Apollo when I was 20 years old because they would all, Chuck would play there and Dionne Warwick would play there. And so it's called the Chitlin Circuit.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I was going to ask you originally, just to put a button on Texas, before you moved, did you play a blues or Chitlin circuit in Texas? Did you have a band there before you left for the World Series?
Yeah, I played at a place I was in a band called CL and the Pictures, and we were pretty big down there. I mean, we had all the work we wanted, and there was a club called the Jimmy Menudas Club, and that's where everybody played. Bobby Blue Bland, and that was the white club that everybody played. Don Roby had a club called the Palladium, which was an African American club in Houston too. I went there too. As a matter of fact, one of my prized possessions is a lifetime membership to the Palladium, signed by Don Roby.
That is.
If I can find it, I'll send.
Oh, please! That is so. I mean, was the Palladium already a chain? I mean, they obviously had the famous one in New York.
No, I don't remember it being a chain.
Yeah,
no, it was just Don Roby's club,
And you were already at that point.
And then there was a place in the Fifth Ward. That was in the Third Ward. There was a place in the Fifth Ward called the Club Matinee. I used to go there too.
You ever play? Did you play burlesque houses ever?
No, I played a place in Kemah, Texas, called Oak Park, and that was a big deal club. Where a lot of people went, all white people. There was no segregation. I mean, there was no integration. I mean, so they had black clubs and white clubs. The Club Matinee was a black club, and Don's place, the Palladium was, but we played the white club, but we played R&B music. Everybody loved it too.
I mean, this is like so. But when you get to New York and you already had a reputation as how did you get? Did your role change, like in the sense of you became a producer as opposed to somebody who was promoting the records themselves?
Well, in those days, you did both, I went to every session. I mean, that's what Jerry Wexler, he went to every. I was an A&R. I ended up being vice president at 22 years old of Scepter Records.
Oh,
A&R,
my God. Are you kidding? Dude, you're an avid 22 years old?
Yeah, Florence made me that, and
oh my God!
So I went to every session, whether Burt Bacharach was producing it or, and at the end of the sessions, we would cut like 3-4 songs in 3 hours, and then we'd go to this place and have dinner, and then we'd discuss which ones we should put out as a single, and I was in on all of that stuff. And they listened to me too a lot of times because I was the kid on the team. How you always ask the kid, "Well, what do you think?"
Well, I mean, sometimes the kid gets ignored. I mean, they obviously knew you. What was the first real credibility test that you passed when they were like, "I don't know," and you're like, "No, that's got to be the single."
Well, there's two of them. The one that comes to mind the most was a song called "Message to Michael" that Dionne Warwick had. You remember that song?
Dude, I know that song. Yeah.
Take a message to Michael. Tell her you love her more each day. And it had that great lick. Let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Anyway, I loved it. And Dionne, Bert and Hal David wrote that song to be Message to Martha, and Jerry Butler recorded it.
Sure.
They didn't do anything.
Sure.
Bomb. And then Bert also produced. He had Dionne Warwick on our label, but he also had a deal to produce a guy named Lou Johnson, and he recorded "Message to Martha." And Dion had an idea. Her brother was named Michael. She loved the song and she wanted to record it, but she wanted to change the name of it to "Message to Michael." So she did. And I said, "That's the hit, man." You know?
Wow.
Forget Martha.
Yeah, right,
Michael
right.
And I wanted to put it out. I was working for the label. I was head of A&R and promotion. And I just argued with them. I remember Hal David, rest his soul, who was my dear friend, the guy I worked with more than anybody, really. He taught me so much. Because he wrote the lyrics, you know.
Right.
Bert wrote the music. And I remember following him down into Times Square, arguing with those guys. You got to put out "Message to Michael." You got to let us put that out. And so the next day, Bert and Hal David called the record company and said, "Man, I don't know who this kid Tyrell is, but he sure loves that song "Message to Michael. Let's put it out." You know,
dude, I'm loving this, man. I have goosebumps. It's so beautiful,
man. It was a smash. And another one was like that was a Dionne Warwick's version of "I'll Never Fall in Love Again."
Mm-hmm.
That had been recorded by about 20 people and didn't do anything. And I said, "That's a hit, man. That's the one we should go." And that was after "Message to Michael." And so they started listening to me, and they said, I remember I was coming back to Texas for Christmas, and Bert said, "Okay, we're going to put that song out, but if it's not a hit, don't come back from Texas." And of course it was, you know. What do you get when you fall in love? That song. So I had my little moments that I won my arguments. I was very passionate about it too. If I believed in something, you know, when you're a kid, man, you know, if you believe in something, you believe in something. You're not totally influenced by the politics of a record company necessarily, you know.
Well, I don't want you to give away any of the Tyrell secrets, but I mean, can you just talk to the audience out there, people that might be tuning in tomorrow or in 50 years? You know, you can be humble and say that it became a hit, but 20 people record a song and it bombs or it doesn't do anything, and then all of a sudden it takes off. Can you honestly say that it was just Dion, or was there stuff that you were involved with, even nuanced stuff, that made it take off when it didn't take off before?
Well, I mean, in those days, and I still think I have just an ear for music.
Clearly, yeah.
I'm not trained, but used to, you know, I believe in my own instincts, and they've proven me right a lot of times. I mean, with B.J. Thomas, we had a great run. I got Florence at Scepter to sign B.J. The first song we did was "Don't Let Somebody Cry." And that was huge. And then I brought another buddy of mine from Houston. I told her that we should sign to the label and let it, because I love the way he wrote songs. His name was Mark James, and he ended up writing "Hooked on a Feeling," and you know, which was a huge hit for BJ. And he also wrote, oh God, what's the song? I'm blanking now. Big hit for Willie Nelson too.
I'll look it up. Yeah.
What's that song? I mean, I don't know. I was doing good. I wasn't forgetting anything.
It'll come. It'll come. Mark, yeah, hold on. Anyway,
it's a song. He made the song of the year. Willie Nelson recorded it 20 years later, or 10 years later.
Let's see here.
What's the name of that song?
Always on My Mind.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, beautiful tune. Yeah, beautiful. So but I mean, what were you looking? I mean,
first, and we released it on Scepter Records, and you know, then Willie recorded it like quite a few years later. So I was right on that song too, you know.
What was your ear telling you about these? I mean, to me, it's magical stuff. Now, sometimes it's just part of the muse. I mean, you just follow the muse. But what is it about? I mean, what was it about? What were you hearing? What did you hear? I mean, it's like, it's almost, it's special, man.
Say this,
Yeah.
hey man, this is a hit. That's the way you talk. This is a hit. You know, you're like confident about it. This is a hit. And you know, I don't remember analyzing why it was a hit, and you know, like just had the feel of a hit record.
But my question is, like, you go back to Houston for Christmas. They said don't come back if that song's not a hit. Can you just talk about how
Never Fall in Love Again? That one is I'll Never Fall in Love Again.
Right. No, but I mean, like, I remember talking about. I mean, I've talked to so many different cats where the cats like the Whispers would be recording in Southern Cal, and they're like, oh, by the way, you're getting radio play in the Bay Area. Like, how? Like, did you have these magical? Because we were not fully interconnected at that point. I mean, did those things get a lot of radio play outside of the tri-state area?
What do you mean, Dionne Warwick?
Yeah. Like, how did you know?
He was a star, man. Almost every record we put out was some kind of hit, and then she was a big record seller. And at one time, she was the #1 female record seller. You know, there was. Then Aretha came along and kind of knocked her out and did the #1 spot. Aretha kind of took over, but they were in the same category, you know, best R&B. And Dionne's music was, she really interpreted Burt Bacharach's music beautifully. You know, she added something, a pop thing to it that no one else did. You know, no one else could do. You know, she made those songs universally accepted. You know? Whereas they were just as pop as they were R&B, and they were standards kind of their time. They were a cross between the Great American Songbook and the rhythm and blues that we were living, you know, like the Brill Building rhythm and blues. It's a good combination, Dionne, Burt Bacharach, and Hal David.
I mean, I have to believe that Steve Tyrell, after a long day in the studio, after maybe a meal, were you going to the Bitter End in Folk City and checking out? Did you discover anybody how did you even discover B.J. Thomas?
Well, B.J. and I were from Houston, and we were in competing bands, and I always thought he was great.
Wow.
So he was the first guy that I signed to Scepter, and of course he had quite a run of hits, you know, and so he did a lot for my credibility. B.J. did, you know, and then Chuck, I worked with Chuck, and we had Maxine Brown, and one of my favorite tunes that I did we did with Maxine Brown was a song that was written by a young girl named Carole King, you know, and the Shirelles. I mean, there was quite a little scene going on there. The Shirelles kind of started Carole King with "Will You Love Me Tomorrow," you know.
Wait, can you go a little bit deeper on that? I'm not. You're hipping me to some stuff I'm not aware of.
Well, you know, tonight you're mine completely. You give me your love so sweetly. Tonight the light of love is in your eyes. But will you love me tomorrow? That was, I think, Carole King's. If it wasn't her first hit, it was her second hit. You know, as a songwriter. Her and Jerry Goffin wrote that song. And the Shirelles did it. And then Carole would come and pitch other songs to us. And then she had a song called "Oh No, Not My Baby" that I loved a lot. And we recorded that with Maxine Brown.
Wow.
And then I produced it years later with Linda Ronstadt. So there was a whole group of us, you know, Carole King and Jerry Goffin and you know, that Brill Building scene that was going on. We were part of that.
See, now you're blowing my mind, because it's like, well, George Clinton was over there. He's the one that hit me to $20,000. I mean, I can't believe The thing about Steve Tyrell, and this is so interesting. I mean, you were already a seasoned road dog on the bandstand. Like, I know you must have been going down and singing your guts out at night. Were you going to clubs in New York to play?
No, that's not. That didn't really happen.
Interesting.
I made a record back before I went to work for Scepter, and I was like in my teens, and it was a hit in Houston.
What was the name of it? I need to know the name of it. What was the name?
It was called Payday Someday.
Oh, my God. This is unbelievable.
But I didn't dig it, man. I wasn't. I didn't want to be. I was more interested in the music business and making records than I was actually being on the stage singing.
Dig.
Of course, I learned years later, why I felt that way. We used to learn all the songs that we did on stage from the records. We didn't know enough to transpose them into a different key. Right, you follow me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
And all of those groups sang real high, And I have a baritone. I didn't know I was a baritone. Sinatra's a baritone too, So I didn't like to. I'd get hoarse. We'd learn these songs. They'd be way up there, and I'd get hoarse singing, and I didn't like it. So even though I had a hit. And I just thought I'd rather be producing records than standing up there singing at the top of my range. And it was years later when I sang in Father of the Bride, and people started telling me I should make my own albums, that I realized you don't have to do every song in the highest key. You can do it in your key.
Oh my! But I mean, you were really
I've never been hoarse since then, I don't think about singing the songs in the same key that some of these great, like the Temptations, would sing a song in. Tonight you better. I can't get up there like that.
But I mean, essentially, you were ensconced in like soul music. I mean, it wasn't like you could.
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
and I was was ensconced in producing it too. I loved going in the studio. We used to record at. There wasn't a good studio in Houston, so we used to go to Cosmos in New Orleans.
Oh my dude, Tyrell, come on, dude. Dr. John was there. Are you kidding me, dude?
Man, my best buddy at those days was Alan Toussaint. Alan Toussaint, man. I signed Alan Toussaint to my label. I gave him it. I was the one that told Alan, man, you should make your own records, as he was doing all that great writing and producing in New Orleans. But I liked the way he sang, and I convinced him that he should be an artist himself. And if you look up biographies of Alan Toussaint, he gives me credit for that.
All right, I want you to just see. Joe Banishak was down there. They had Minute Records. So
yeah.
You're telling me?
That's right.
Wait, so you?
Joe Banishak. I haven't heard that name.
Oh boy, we're going deep in the well. But no, so the studio that you cut Payday, was that at Cosmos or was that in Houston?
No, that was in Beaumont, Texas, and that was halfway between Houston and New Orleans, and a guy. That's where, I forget his name, but he was really cool too, man. He did a lot of. I forgot his name. He built a studio in Beaumont, and I can't.
Oh no, don't worry about it.
He was very famous, man. He produced a lot of good music. This guy, and I forgot his name.
I'm just trying to figure out, like, the Crusaders. By the way, Hubert Laws was also in those wards as well.
Yeah, he was in the 3rd ward.
And you were in the 5th ward, you said?
5th ward.
Fifth ward.
Bloody 5th. It was called the Bloody 5th.
Dude, you are. And you're telling me that you're the only Italian white family in the wards?
As far as I can remember, some of our cousins had grocery stores in the 3rd ward, but I don't remember anybody having a grocery store in the 5th ward. The 3rd ward was a little more upscale than the 5th ward.
Dude, you are unbelievable, Tyrell. How did you wait? Hold on a second. How did you get hip to Cosmos? I mean, how did you know that it was happening there?
Well, that was the only studio. Once I started making records and knowing people like Jerry Wexler, and I was a student of everything that was going on.
Sure.
Cosmos, was the place down there to record. I mean, they had fat style. Plus, also, when I was working for Scepter Records, I'd go and meet these people that were running these studios and try to get them to recorded something, and a lot of times it paid off. I signed Aaron Neville, and we had that song, "Tell It Like It Is."
Oh.
And then years later, when I was producing Linda Ronstadt, she came to me and told me how much she loved Aaron Neville. And I said, "Well, I know Aaron Neville," and she did. We did "Don't Know Much" with Aaron Neville. And that won like 5 Grammys or something.
You connected with, you knew Aaron back in the, like when
I knew Aaron when he was, Don't Know Much, not Don't Know Much, the other one.
Yeah, no.
Tell it like it is. Da 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 da. I was a partner in that tune. I didn't produce it. It was already produced. They recorded it at Cosmos, and I liked it, and so I know Aaron from those days.
That is
I worked with Aaron Neville on
unbelievable.
2 records. His 2 major hits. Tell It Like It Is and Don't Know Much with Linda Ronstadt.
Dude, you are so you're telling me that, like, were other your folks did people think you were insane for, even though you had a hit and you were singing, that you were like, that you walked away? You didn't walk away from it. You were just really into producing. But
I walked away from singing. I didn't want to make any records of my own. I didn't like performing.
Yeah.
And I signed to B.J. Thomas, and I was responsible for all his songs that he was doing on this new job I had. And so I didn't think about finding any songs for me. Everything I found, I gave to B.J., including Mark James and his songwriting. I brought Barry Mann and Cynthia Wilde, who were, my friends and Hall of Fame songwriters, to the projects, and they wrote "I Just Can't Help Believing" for BJ, and then we went. So I was an A&R guy. I was an artist when I was in high school, and I had a hit, but I didn't want to pursue that. I was more interested in, much more interested in not being an artist, but being a producer and an A&R guy, and promotion man, and being in the music business.
Is it fair to say that because you're just like, even though Wexler was your idol or someone you looked up to, and there were, Tom Dowd, and you had, all these incredible cats, and can you talk a little bit about what the Bean Counters were doing at that time? Basically, because John Densmore told me, with Elektra, Jack Holzman, it was basically a boutique label, but the Bean Counters and the money people were like, well, we don't really know what the musicians are doing exactly, but we're making money, so we'll leave the creative stuff to them. And now, in today's world, the Bean Counters are running the music. They know nothing about the music, and I'm not trying to paint with a huge broad brush, but that's part of the issue, man.
That's pretty true too. Well, the old record business were people that Leonard Chess,
yep,
and Barry Gordy and Jerry Wexler. Those guys were in the studios. They made the decisions of what songs to do and who was going to do the arrangements, and they sat in the control room and made the records.
Right.
And so they were closer to what was going on than the Bean Counters were trying to collect money from the distributors and stuff, you know.
When
Ran the label.
you were at a certain point. Well, I also have to ask you, like, with Chuck Jackson, like, you guys would be picking up rhythm sections on the road. Is that fair to say? It was just you and you'd be.
No, Chuck had a band. He had a band. I
So-
mean, we might pick up the horn section, you know. But Chuck had a band. Chuck was a big star, man.
Dude, he was the
had a
the
band.
man,
They would-
dude.
He had a band, and some of the bands would, would travel. They had the Motortown Review, which the band and all the artists would get on a bus and travel all over and do concerts every couple of nights, and there was a lot of that. You know, they put tours together, you know, of the Supremes, the Temptations, all the Motown acts, and they would all play one city. Chuck was like that too. He would sometimes, you know, he played a lot of stuff with Jackie Wilson too. They were friends. So they put a little tour together in the bands, and they'd go play one city after another.
I cannot believe that you're telling me that were there times that they'd drive you to the white side of town to stay, and then they'd have to stay on the black side of town?
Every time, not
Every time. And now see, in tech,
every time, you know.
Holy
now
shit.
sometimes I could stay in the black motel because they checked me and nobody knew the difference.
Right.
If you know, but they couldn't stay in a white motel for sure, you know. And I remember when I moved to New York and Florence gave me my job. I couldn't believe that you didn't need a car in New York, because I had a car. I had a car in Texas. I would have driven my car to New York and my new job, and I got this guy, Clarence Holloman. He was a great guitar player. We called him Gristle.
Clarence Holloman, dude. This is so old school, man.
You know Clarence?
I don't know that name. Thank you for hipping me to him. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he was famous in Houston, and a great guitar player. And you could look him up, Clarence Holloman. Anyway, he Don Roby played all the stuff for Don Roby. Him and oh God, what was the guitar player on all of Bobby's stuff? He was so cool. Yeah, some names.
What, Mel Brown or something?
No, that wasn't his name.
Anyway, go ahead. When you first moved, you couldn't believe you didn't need a car when you got to New York.
Yeah, so I had to drive up there, so I got him to go with me, and I wanted to get him a job. I said, Clarence, you need to be in New York, man, up there with me. I'll hook you up with Burt Bacharach and the Shirelles, and you can pick up a job, and you're great. You shouldn't be in Houston. So I talked him into driving up there with me, and we had to, you know, when we needed to get gas, we had to put Clarence in the back seat, you know.
Absolutely. Have him duck down. He had to duck down, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and then we get gas. Or sometimes I drop Clarence off on the outskirts of town, you know, and then go get the gas and then come back and get Clarence. But that was the times, you know.
I wonder.
We did. Didn't think anything of it, to be honest with you. When I look back on those days and driving to New York with Clarence Holloman through the South, I get the most respect from my mother and father, because they ran a grocery store in the Fifth Ward, and they let me do it. Like, you know, they didn't say, no, you can't do that. You know, you can't drive through the South with a black man.
With a colored person. Yeah, exactly. I love they let you, do it, man. You know, the Italian.
They didn't. No, they just let me do my thing, and I did. And I think that's really honorable to them, you know.
Well, let me ask you. I want to ask you about. I mean, I have a very Jewish name, but you know, I have a lot of great Italian friends, and I remember interviewing John Hendricks, the great singer, evolution of the blues, and I just want to ask you. He said, without the Sicilians, there'd be no jazz in America. You know, they were the ones that had the clubs. He said basically the Sicilians didn't treat us like niggers. And I'm not saying that you may not have Sicilian blood, but is it fair to say that
I am? I'm 100% Sicilian.
Oh, you are 100%. Okay, so explain. Do you agree with that? Because actually, I think there's a lot of validity to it because they.
My family, there was no such thing as racial prejudice in my family, and I mean in my mother and my father. Now, some of my cousins and uncles were racist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was amazing. They wouldn't have passed the test you just said. Some of them, but our family, we never used the N word ever in my life. My father wouldn't allow it. It just didn't. Didn't happen. It wasn't part of anything that we would even think about saying. You know.
I guess what about the idea that they were the ones that provided they recognized the genius of the musicians, the black musicians. They paid them for their time. They paid them for their art. And, you know, to me, I mean, is it fair to say that without the Sicilians, that this American art form known as jazz may never have even come to fruition?
Well, if you say so. I mean, I know a lot of, I mean, that's not my personal experience, but a lot of Italian people own the clubs and they also owned rental property and
right.
stuff like that, you know,
right? Because
they were immigrants, and so they came to America and they bought property and they became landlords, and they had a different view of Black America. You know,
what was that view?
It was a good view.
Yeah,
it was a good view. They knew their, you know. My father used to give our grocery store gave credit. You know, I remember, I can still see the book with people's names on it, and if they couldn't pay the bill, they charge it. You know,
I love it, dude. No credit card, but then they just have a little, you know.
Yeah, there was a black. I mean, not a black book, but a book. You know, with and it had everybody had an account in there, and my father would just give them credit. When they got money, they'd come pay him. And it was great. I remember that very clearly.
Did you have, I mean, I've interviewed enough cats who were with Buddy Rich and other people. They'd have harrowing experiences, especially in the South, where they'd get to a hotel, they'd have the black bass player have to duck down until they checked in. Then they'd bring him into the room. Next thing you know, the sheriff's knocking on the door. You know, they're in the middle of the night. Did you have run-ins with the Klan at all, even in the days with Chuck and Jackie Wilson and those cats?
No, well, because most of my time with Chuck and them were in New York. You know, by the time I started working with Chuck and knew Chuck and Maxine Brown and Dion and those people, we were playing places like the Apollo and the Uptown Theater and the 20 Grand, and we didn't have any issues.
No, but I'm talking about when you were.
We had to leave the club at the Uptown Theater in Philadelphia because there was a race riot starting, and the guy that owned the Uptown said, "Hey, you guys better get out of here." And then we went to meet Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. They were playing, and afterwards we were thinking of signing that to Scepter Records. And Florence Greenberg and I went up there, and so the promoter got nervous. There was starting to be some problems in the theater, and told us we should leave. And we went and got a hotel room, and they came after the gig. That's the only one I can think of that dealt with, a race situation.
What would you like? How? Why? This is obviously a very broad question, but just because you had family members that were bigoted and that did foster discrimination, like, what is the? I mean, I'm 43. I'm pretty much surrounded by a very eclectic mix of people. I try to. I mean, I just try to keep an open mind and tolerant. Like, what is the hang up about skin color, man? I mean, to me, like, you saw it.
It's ridiculous. I'm not.
I mean, just I only ask you. The only reason I ask you this is
enough to describe it.
Sure.
But I can tell you my experience.
Go ahead.
When I came up, raised in the Fifth Ward, lived behind a grocery store. All my friends were black, and they were all good people. You know, we didn't have. They were friends, man. You know, and my father treated everybody right, and I didn't grow up in the bigoted. You know, they would use. My family would never use the N word or anything like that, but some of the it was just part of being a white man our white people in the 60s. They would use the N word sometimes and mean nothing by it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to you?
Well, I mean, to me, like that, it just speaks to the idea that they just see other people as subhuman if they don't have white skin, and it just gets a little bit strange to me, especially when I talk to someone like you.
Well, it's the biggest form of ignorance you could possibly have, but that's the world, man. It's all like that. I don't relate to that kind of bigotry or prejudice. I don't relate to it. It doesn't make any sense to me. It sounds stupid to me that you would judge, that you're so shallow that you would judge somebody by their skin color. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, really? That's what you see? What a fucking idiot you are. you know what I mean? I would think they were morons.
Well, I mean, especially when you start to listen to Styx Hooper, the Nighthawks, if you either look at that and recognize the genius and pay respects to it, or you just bury your head in the sand and just pretend that they don't have any. I mean, it's talent. They bring a lot to the table. It's like be like you're not being honest if you can't recognize that. If you are, then and I feel bad. I mean, to me it's like today it's more covert. Back in the day, I mean, I've interviewed enough of the cats that, Richard Davis, all these amazing jazz musicians, that it was very overt. He'd show up at a classical tryout for one of these big orchestras, and he was head and shoulders. They'd put a curtain in front of him, but during the tryout, and he was head and shoulders above anybody else, but he'd never get the call back because he was, black skin. So it was like
that's sad. That's sad, but true.
Right. And I just,
I get it.
Steve Tyrell. I mean, I just wonder about, like, in your mind, being that you're on the road now, we're in this time of there's a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder coming out of the virus. We're not even out of it, but a lot of people are traumatized by it. I'm not. I'm talking about patrons of the arts and people in general. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about, what you think the strongest qualities of leadership are on the bandstand and as a leader in today's world. I'm not even saying that it would line up with what was happening back in the mid 60s when you were cooking at Scepter. I'm just saying now, what do you believe are the strongest qualities of leadership for other cats who are trying to move ahead? Let's face it, intellectual royalties are non-existent now. You can get 14 or 15,000 downloads on Spotify. You're getting $10. There is no record-based commerce industry anymore. So the way you make money in music now is by being a road dog, which is awesome. But, we're in this precarious spot where there's this coronavirus. And I wanted you to talk about what you think are the strongest qualities of leadership in this time that people needed to be mindful of.
God, that's a question that may be over my head.
No, dude, come on, bro. You were living in the Fifth Ward in Houston, man.
Right, but I wasn't thinking about all this stuff. You know what I mean? I was lucky in the sense that that's the way it was, and I didn't have any prejudice feelings about my,
Absolutely. No, I'm talking about... I'll give you a question. you're on a tour, or you just finished a tour, or you're on one right now, and it's like, do we as a society have to just accept and have to live with the virus, and should we just move forward with like that's the kind of stuff I'm trying to. How have you wrapped your head around that? Like, how are you moving forward?
I've never the virus to me has just uncovered more of the I don't know idiotic views of like why the hell wouldn't you get it back?
I know now and it's because now I agree.
I grew up in polio, you know.
Right.
When I grew up, kids got polio and died. You know, my father wouldn't have thought twice about me not being vaccinated. I'm his son, and I'm 5 years old. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Or whatever I was, 6, 7. But we went through polio, and we got vaccinated. I don't get this. Everything has to do with some sense of entitlement. You know,
it is
that we never even thought about. You know, you might die. Well, then vaccinate your kids. I mean, because most of them don't die. You know, you know what I mean. But people get the disease and still stand. It's some sort of false sense of entitlement.
It comes down to the fact that people are, instead of really thinking for themselves, there's so much dogma and groupthink that they basically say, well, you know, I'm just going to do this because I don't want somebody mandating or telling me what to do. When it's like,
that's right.
You know, you're an ass, dude, because, you know, it's more to the point. What is the feeling like for you playing? I mean, I guess, you know, music I remember talking to Danny Korchmar, the great guitar player, and he was like,
yeah, sure, I know Danny.
Yeah,
Danny.
Yeah, beautiful cat. I love him so much. He's like, music used to dictate our culture. And that had a lot to do with concept albums. It had a lot to do with the cats that you were fostering. Just in general, music was a major. I remember Art Blakey saying that, you know, it's my job to wash away the dust of everyday life for all the patrons that come into this place. And man, you would walk out of there with introspection, burning. I mean, you would just lose your mind in a good way. And I just like, I wanted to just ask you about. Now we have this stuff where we've gotten to the point now where you can pay to play or you can play for the door.
Yeah, right. Which is kind of weird.
It's weird. It's like people are starving it. I mean, I'm not saying that there weren't geniuses that didn't in your back in the day that didn't starve to death in the alley, or that, you know, I'm sure there were gigs where maybe you know, people were shysters with the money and stuff. But
right, you make $15 a night, you know.
Right. But I mean, like in general, like what?
Played 3 sets for $15 a night. And, yeah.
But I mean, you know what? Like
I don't know what the question is, but
there really is no question. You can just rip. I mean,
there's a joy in playing music, and there's a joy in learning music, and there's a joy in trying to get better and at what you do, and there's not only a joy, but there's a reward for it, and music gives you that. I guess sports does too, if you really train and practice, you know.
Well, I just think it's also about, like, I mean, to me, it's like the most healing. Music is a healing force. If people are, especially as patrons, if you go there with that kind of mentality of a fanatic and you bring that energy to the bandstand and get the musicians out of their thinking mind, and then it's over, man. Then it's on. And that's the kind of music I need. I need that in my life. And I don't like the formula trips. I just wonder what you. I mean, there's just. I don't know. We've been cooking here for over an hour. I mean, can we do set 2 maybe in the new year, like in January sometime?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, sure. I enjoyed talking to you. I have to jump though, but
yeah, no. I mean, I'll get in touch.
I just think the ability, or not the ability, but the privilege of playing music for people and getting back. Now, I've done a standard. I mean, I've done 13 albums. I've done a Sinatra album, standards albums, a Backrack album, R&B album. I mean, I've made a career of trying to sing the best songs ever written. You know,
right.
So that's a privilege, man. You know, you start singing these songs, you know, you understand why they've lasted so long, and how you've been given an opportunity to keep them going for a while. You know, that's been my reward, is to continue to perform these incredible works of art and put them out there, and you put your own soul into them, and that's been my reward for playing, you know.
Well, Sinatra was. Did you connected with Sinatra pretty quickly when you moved to New York?
Well, I'm still very close to his family.
I know you. No, I know that, but I mean, like originally, I mean.
Yeah. I started making my first album when I sang after I sang in Father the Bride in like 1989 or something.
91 or something. Yeah. That was a sick. I used to love that, and I didn't know it was you. Now it's like, holy cow, man, it's unbelievable.
So I kind of discovered that genre, and then the first person to come out and support me was Frank Sinatra Jr.
Wow.
He loved what I did, and he turned me on to his whole family. And that was, I'm Italian, so, man, you know.
Now you see it, there you go.
Frank Sinatra Jr. calls you up and tells you how much he likes what you're doing, and you tell your mother that. She comes out of the grave and starts dancing around the grave. My boy, he's liking the Sinatras. They're liking my boy.
I love it, dude. I mean, by the way, just before I let you go, are you hip to a dear friend of mine, Johnny Lee Shell?
No, I'm not.
Another Texas cat, kind of similar to you. Great producer out in L.A., but
Mr. See those Johnny Lee? Maybe yes.
Yeah, I would.
Studio. I've worked in his studio. Yeah.
Yeah, Johnny. He was in a band called Baby that was in Texas for a while. But he was. I love the grit of Texas. I also want to say one thing about Sinatra, and as you know, I mean, if his band, he had a mixed race band, but if some of them, if they showed up at a club and they're like, no, we don't use colored musicians, he'd say, all right, let's pack up and get out of here. He was amazing, dude, Frank. I mean, as far as in terms of seeing us as one human race.
Totally.
You know?
He's famous for that.
Yeah.
He's famous for that. One of the first guys I met, were two of the guys that played on my early records and really encouraged me was Sweets Edison.
Sure.
And Clark Terry, you know.
Oh my! Now we're getting so now we're cooking, man.
Well, those guys were like, you know, and Sweets used to tell me all kinds of things that had them on the road, and he told me that Frank, when they'd go on the road, and Sweets had a hotel room, Frank would make sure that his hotel room was next to his. It wasn't at the end of the motel.
Right. Just to be safe.
If anything happened, just bang on the door.
Thank God for the Sicilians, man. Thank God for the Italian. I mean, your parents, man, that grocery store, I don't know. Tyrell, you blew my mind, man. I really would love to do set 2 with you in the new year, man. I would love to. We have more to do.
Well, listen, man, I've enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll continue it down the road. Where you live in New York?
I'm a New Yorker by trade, but I live in Tucson, Arizona. So if you guys are,
well, we play there, and we'll play there. I don't know if it's Tucson. It's another.
Well, are you talking about you got a tour through Arizona?
Yeah, I'll be in Arizona in the new year. I just got back from New York yesterday. I played, you know.
All right, well then
and we'll get to know each other.
Oh, that'd be great, man.
All right, man.
Yeah, Chuck Jackson. Happy New Year, Steve. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Later. Thanks to Alan Schwartzberg for hooking me up with Steve Tyrell. We uncovered quite a bit of early Tyrell history today, which was important. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show on Power Talk. Until next time, we'll see you.